What's going on, guys? Bexio back in today. We got a brand new video this time talking about the stimulus check that we're all expecting and what we can do with that check. So we all know that we got a check coming from the Stimulus Bill, the CARE Act, for obviously single people $1,200, married $2,400. But in this video, I want to talk about the things that you can do with that check. I'm going to try and put it in an order of what to do first, and then what is least important to kind of do with it. So this is just my ideas of things to do. My thoughts on what would be a good use for this money, especially in a time where job security and wage cuts and hour cuts is something that's most likely going to happen if it hasn't already happened to you. So this is the things that I would do in this order of what you can use your stimulus check for. So the first thing would be obviously to pay off any bills. Use it to pay your bills, your rent, power bill, any utilities, stuff like that. Use it to pay that and kind of ease the burden of maybe losing hours or losing money or salary or stuff like that. If you can use it in that type of sense, then I think that's the best thing to do right now, is to kind of use it to ease your burden of bills or things, monthly charges that you have to pay in order to live, buying food, stuff like that is what I would put it towards first, the necessities. If you need to, if you have your job cut hours and stuff and now you're needing that money for this, then that's what you need it for. And I think that's the first thing that anyone should be using this for is, buying food, paying their bills, making sure that, they have that place to live, they have their house or rent or whatever, or wherever they're living, and then you can provide food. It's obviously the number one thing, and you got to make sure that you can keep that going. So now the second thing you can do, if it's not a huge worry of strapped for cash for paying bills and buying food and doing all that stuff, I would use this money to add it to an emergency fund. So if you... I'm not sure. Okay. My Alexa just went off. That was kind of weird. I don't think I said anything close to her name, but we'll go back. So number two would be adding it to an emergency fund, where you're going to get your fund, you're set up for in case of a job loss or wage loss or anything like that. Obviously, emergency funds. What I recommend would be a 6-month emergency fund. Would be something like that. Anywhere from 3 to 6 months is where you'd want to keep your emergency fund. So it's 3 to 6 months of expenses, and that's because, especially right now, you might have your job keeping hours and stuff, but if things get worse or ramp up, it could come back and cut hours and cut wages and do all that type of stuff, in which case you'd want this emergency fund. You would want to have this money ready to go, as well as adding to this money so that you can keep 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, so you don't have to worry in case you lose your job completely or get hours and stuff cut, and you can survive and know that you have enough money to get you through, hopefully through this whole thing. If not, get you through at least a period of trying to get a different job, bring in more income and do some stuff like that and figure things out, so you're not just like scrambling and have no money at all. I think people underestimate emergency funds, so people don't really think about them, especially like when things are good. Like before this whole outbreak happened, things were good. I've talked to people about making sure they have emergency funds ready to go and keep their 3 to 6 months of expenses within an account somewhere, to just make sure that they're good and just let it sit there and make sure it's good to go. And a lot of people don't think about doing stuff like this until this happens, and it's too late. If you're starting your emergency fund now, it's too late. You're in this pandemic, and you need the emergency fund now, which is why you need to build it when things are going good. When you don't necessarily need that money immediately is the best time to build it, and not try and build it when things are bad, when it's going to be super hard to build it. Now, the third thing to do, now we're getting more into not necessarily necessities types things. Those are the two big things. Make sure you pay your bills, can get food, can eat, can survive, do all those basic stuffs. Adding it to your emergency fund to make sure your future, in case things get even more rough or get worse, make sure you're all right there. So now number 3 is going to be paying off any of your credit card balances. So if you are positive that you have, the money you need right now for anything, short term, positive that you have your emergency fund set up and it's a strong emergency fund. Even if, I'd say probably if you have an emergency fund worth like 8 months, 9 months right now, you can probably move on to these steps and then just continue adding it from whatever money you get right now from working. And if you have like a stable job, something that you're pretty sure, no one can be 100% sure, but you're pretty sure that your hours won't be cut, your wages won't be cut and stuff like that, would be to pay off your credit cards. And the reason I say this is because you can get this basically free money. It's not really, you get into logistics stuff, it's not really free money, but you get this money, and if you don't need it, then you can use it to pay off credit cards and just pay down your debt if you have any. Obviously, this is if you have credit card debt, because nobody should have credit card debt. We should all pay off our balances at the end of the month, every month, but there are people who don't do that. So I would use this to pay off your credit card balance to kind of ease that burden a little bit and make sure that you can pay off your credit card and get it to zero as soon as possible. And this influx of money, as long as 1 and 2 are done and you have a job that you're pretty secure in, I would do this and make sure you pay it off and get your credit card debt down if you have any. So if you don't have any, you can move straight on to number 4 of investing it, putting it in the markets. It's going to be tough to watch for a little bit. Now, my recommendation if you're going to invest it would not be to take all 1,200 and just throw it in a stock or in an index fund right now all at once and just let it go. The reason I would kind of dollar cost average in, which means like you would take that 1,200, put it, let's say Robinhood, put in your Robinhood account, and then you would buy a couple shares of, let's say VTI, the index fund, and you'd buy a couple shares of that. And then the next week you buy a couple more shares of that, and then the next week you buy a couple more shares of that. So that you're dollar cost averaging in, because we are in a bear market. So even if there are big green days, like we've seen, there's been red days that have just completely wiped out any progress that we've made in the market. So dollar cost averaging in would be the best thing in my eyes to do, because then you're not putting all of your risk all on one day. And just watching it go down can kind of hurt if it does do that. If you buy in at one date and then it goes down and you've lost 10% of the value already and within a week, it's just going to be very tough to look at. It's going to be easier to even sell to yourself if you're buying VTI, let's say, and you buy a couple shares and then it goes down a couple dollars. So you buy a couple more shares and you see your average drop. So your break-even point will be less. And then the next week, if it drops more, you buy more. So you're just feeling better about kind of catching deals instead of watching it lose money all at once. Because imagine 3 weeks in a row of losses where you're buying in to average out those losses instead of buying in right in the beginning and then eating all 3 weeks of losses. So that's what I would do if you were going to go off and invest it. Now, you could throw it all at once. I mean, you could do that and watch it go down, because we are in a bear market, so it'll probably go down. But if your plan, and you can mentally handle that, watch it go out for the next few years, then it'll start probably gaining money and gaining momentum and stuff. But the short term is probably going to lose money. And finally, the last thing that you can do, and this is more like option, if you have everything else covered, you have investment accounts, you have money in there, you've paid off all your credit cards, there's no debt, you have no worries about providing food, paying your bills, and doing all that kind of stuff, would be, you can use this money to just buy things that you want. Just buy something that you wanted, a pair of shoes you wanted, maybe some electronics, some tech, maybe something that you wanted for a little bit, AirPods, some people, maybe, but you can use it to buy that stuff. If everything else is perfectly done and you got your emergency fund bills are set, you got money in an investment account, and you just don't want to add stuff right now because of the market, I can understand that. You can buy things, different products. I mean, anything that you really have been wanting and that you haven't been able to get, would be like the last thing you could do with this money. If you got everything else set and everything else is good to go, then you can just, use it to buy whatever you want. No one's going to stop you. That's not going to be something terrible. As long as everything else is set. That is a huge, huge deal. Everything else has to be ready to go and set. You got your emergency fund, bills are paid, you got the job stability, you got investment account already set up, you got investments in there, and you're good to go. So I would probably say if you have an investment account over the amount of the stimulus bill, the check that you're getting, then this one might be an option to kind of splurge a little bit. I would still take part of it. Maybe you take, if you're getting $1,200, take the $200 and get stuff you want, and then the $1,000 go invest it. I wouldn't spend all of it on products and stuff. That's just not smart in my opinion. But no one can say don't buy anything. That's the whole reason they're sending this out, is to try and kickstart the economy and buy things. So I can see why people do that. But these have been 6 things that you can do with your stimulus check. A lot of things that, in an order of which I think is most important to get done, and then least important would be number 6. So guys, let me know what you thought of this video, what you're doing with your stimulus check, what your plans are for, if you're just going to invest it, add it to an emergency fund, or just go out and buy some products with it. Let me know. I'd really be interested in seeing what you guys are doing. And as always, guys, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe. I'll see you guys in my next video.